Bring you friendly neighborhood history 24/7, 365 or 366. This is History Hefner, and for the next hour or so, well, for maybe half an hour, I don't know how long this lecture is going to go, I will be bringing you a live stream lecture discussing with you something very interesting historically, and I will be letting you know the topic in a couple of minutes once we get started and a bunch of people will join the chat. But if you are new to the channel, consider liking and subscribing and clicking the notification to be alerted of all my uploads. Usually Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is when I have videos uploading. I have one today uploading at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, detailing the history of the Armenian genocide, an extremely important and crucial topic that I believe is not talked about enough in our history books and our history lexicons. And so I will be exploring that topic and the position of the Armenians during that horrible, horrible encounter, as we just memorialized the anniversary of it. April 24th is National Armenian Holocaust Remembrance Day in the United States. And so that is one of the most important events of the 20th century. So I'll be discussing it in my upcoming video, so please check that out. But if you like history and social studies, you're in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing. That's as easy as it is to become a friendly neighborhood historian. And so for about a half hour to an hour, I will be giving a live stream lecture. And after that, I will be answering all of your questions related to history and social studies for another hour or so, catching up on my Q&As that I missed out on Friday because I was desperately ill with some food poisoning, but I am recovered, doing much better, eating full meals again and all of that great stuff. So thank you for joining us here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner. And like I said, today is our live stream lecture. We do this every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and usually Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can join us for an hour of Q&A, ask me anything about history or social studies and the like, and where you can listen to me, a historian, answer all of your questions about history and social sciences. So we have long-form content that drops every Mondays and Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have short-form content dropping every day. My next long-form video after today will be tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is actually the subject of today's live stream lecture, which I will reveal in a minute once we got a good crowd going. Hello, Fortnite. Thank you for joining us. Always great to have a Fortnite pro here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And obviously a lot going on in the news is impacting my decision to do this topic, because I wasn't sure about what I was going to discuss at first. I thought it might very well be Japan in the 19th century. I was very interested in that topic, talking about the fall of the Tokugawa shogunate, which you guys all know from if you've seen the Hulu series Shogun, how that shogunate came to be. But I was going to discuss its fall and the Meiji Restoration and how Japan became a superpower. I've done that topic a little bit, but I was going to go into a little bit more detail about that, but I'm going to probably hold off on that for another week or so. Last week, we did the Korean War. We do these every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you enjoy social studies, social sciences, the humanities, deep discussions, and good vibes, consider liking and subscribing and joining the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Becoming a friendly neighborhood historian is as easy as liking and subscribing. So Jeff, great to see you. Fortnite, great to see you. Repo is asking, what my opinion on Finland? Great country, an incredible country with a lot of history, which I will be talking about a little bit today in my live stream lecture. So if you like Finland, you'll enjoy learning a little bit about it. Bev Kurlan, good to see you. Yes. True for the world, obviously a lot going on the Pakistan-India border. I talked about it a lot in the Q&A yesterday, so consider liking, subscribing, and go checking those out. We do those every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's an Ask Me Anything. And then today, I'm making up for a missed one from Friday when I was sick, so I'll be answering all of your questions related to history, social studies, the humanities, geopolitics, past and present, later on after I get through my lecture. So, Revolutionary War history, I've got a lot of live stream lectures on that, talked about that a lot here on the channel. What is my message to the world? Love history. That's what I always sign off with. And if you love history, like and subscribe. Lithuania is a fascinating and incredible place. Very powerful, actually, in like the 17th, 18th century. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was the predominant force in Eastern Europe before the rise of the Russian Empire, which is exactly what I'm going to be talking about today, and why were foreigners banned from entering ancient Japan. I'll answer all of your questions later, but I'll answer this one for now, and then buckle up and you can enjoy the live stream lecture, and I'll be talking about Poland too. But the foreigners were banned from entering it's not ancient Japan, it's medieval Japan. The Tokugawa shogunate became extremely leery of the growing influence of the Portuguese and of Catholic Christianity in the Japanese archipelago, and so in 1637, or 1617, I think it was, they banned Christianity. They banned all forms of foreign trade except from Portugal, except for the Dutch, keeping all European influence out of their country for more than 2 centuries until the 1850s, when the United States basically forced Japan to reopen. Showing up with a large contingent and flotilla of ships will obviously put a lot of pressure on someone to comply with your military demands. So yes, and I'm speaking as slowly as I can. And do you like Christopher Columbus? I'm ambivalent. I think it's cool to not like him, and it used to be cool to really like him. I think he's got good things and bad things. I don't think he's one way or the other. No, I don't go this. I don't know a huge amount about that, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'm glad everyone's asking about Eastern European stuff. Poland, Lithuania, Finland, the Nordic peoples as well. I'm glad to see, hopefully we've got some people from around that area in the world. We get people from Russia, Norway, Poland, Ukraine joining us all the time. It's always so great to have them around. And I will be answering all of your questions later on in the Q&A. So if you guys hold on and enjoy the live stream lecture, I can promise to get you guys those questions answered. And if you want to learn more about the history I'm going to discuss, check out my long form video that drops tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I want to show you guys something. I'm going to use my green screen here as my greatest feature. An interesting scene that just developed. So this was the scene yesterday in the Vatican, or Friday. I don't know exactly when. But this was, it was Friday here in the United States, but it was Saturday morning in Italy when the Pope's funeral occurred, early Saturday morning in the United States. President Donald Trump meeting with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, in a very surprise meeting, the first one that the two have engaged in since their raucous argument in the White House led to Zelensky storming off in anger, and Trump basically calling him an underdressed child. The political tensions around the Russo-Ukraine war have been a huge drain, not just for President Trump, but for his predecessor, President Biden, and have continued to inflame international relations and continue to alarm tensions about a growing and mounting potential world war. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is not to insert politics and that into the debate, but I will be and discussing a very important and crucial part of the history of Ukraine as well as the history of Russia, namely what ties them together, something that I've been studying a lot, that is part of my particular area of expertise as a historian with a master's in history, and that is Russia and Ukraine's dynamic. What connects these two countries that a lot of people, that now everyone sees as diametrically opposed? Obviously, the continual incursions of the Russians, especially under the, the continual incursions of the Russians, especially during this most recent war, but also with the seizure of Crimea and Georgia and Chechnya under the Putin regime, have led a lot of people to believe that there can never really be any peace as long as Ukraine has autonomy, and that Putin especially will continue to demand that Russia, as a nationalist power, expands into Eastern Europe and will do so unchecked until the United States basically smashes his army to the pavement. This has been obviously countermanded by a lot of isolationists, like Trump, who basically believe that ending the war in Ukraine is a priority, and maybe giving Putin a little bit of what he wants isn't such a bad idea because he's a paper tiger compared to someone like Adolf Hitler, who just violated every treaty he ever made. Putin has also violated a lot of treaties, but he also doesn't have the power and strength that Adolf Hitler had. So I will be discussing the history, what connects the Russian and Ukrainian people, and why that has been such an integral part of their war and their difficulties to this day. And I have discussed Russia and Ukraine's history on this channel in the past, but it is a current short series I'm doing about Russian history, and I have been doing my early videos about a group called the Kievan Rus, which is the origins of not just Russia, but also the Ukraine. The most simple answer of what connects the two groups of people is this: the Orthodox Church. Now, in Russia, there's the Russian Orthodox Church, and in Ukraine, there's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And for a large segment of their history, when Ukraine was under the control of the Russians, it was just the Russian Orthodox Church. Orthodoxy is a form of Christianity influenced by Eastern Europeans, Greeks, Turks, and the Middle East, that was particularly predominant in Constantinople during the Byzantine Empire between the 4th and 15th centuries. And it basically relies on certain ceremonial traditions, high liturgy and worship, mystical experiences, and all sorts of things, and is similar in some ways to Roman Catholicism, which is far more prevalent in the United States, but is not similar in many other regards, as there are several distinctive theological differences. Eastern Orthodoxy has become extraordinarily popular, and of course, as you can probably denote by the name, is an Eastern Christian religion, focusing on the Near East, the Middle East, Greece, and Eastern Europe. And this is obviously the connection that the Russians and the Ukrainians share, despite the fact that the Patriarch of Moscow blessed Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the Patriarch of Kiev condemned Putin's invasion of Ukraine. The nationalistic differences between the Orthodox Church have led to distinctions and differences within that denomination of Christianity. But I'm not here to talk about theology. I'm here to talk about how it impacts the history around these two incredibly important countries. So the Russian Orthodox and the Ukrainian Orthodox churches are derivatives of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which has had a profound impact on the history of the development of this region of the world. And if there is anything that ties the Russian and Ukrainian people together, despite being neighbors who have a shared history, it is this more than anything else. And if anything could ever bring them to peace, perhaps it is their religious commitments, despite the fact that that doesn't seem to be working right now. So let me see here. So basically, I'm going to tell you the story of how both Russia and Ukraine adopted the Orthodox faith and how that has been a consistent tie for them through the centuries. So this is, it's hard to see him, but this is Prince Vladimir the Great, who is both a Ukrainian and Russian hero. In I'm trying to remember the exact years here. In about the mid-800s, a group of Nordic Viking raiders called the Varangians conquered the city of Novgorod under a leader named Rurik. And the Rurik and his followers and his successors, called the Rurikid, would settle this region that includes Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, what used to be called White Russia, and Russia itself. And this became known as the Kievan Rus, which they would eventually settle under his successor Oleg in a city called Kiev, or Kiev, that they would conquer, I believe, in 878. I believe they conquered it in 878. And so Kiev would become the city of these princes who ruled over the Eastern Slavic regions. The followers of Rurik were known as the Rus, and they intermarried with the Slavic peoples who they had conquered. So Vikings, who were known for raiding and pillaging, in this case, were known for their conquering, and they settled Eastern Europe in that area near the Dnieper, Don, and Volga rivers. And their main areas of settlement became cities like Novgorod, which is extraordinarily important and one of Russia's most well-known cities, and of course Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine to this day, and is better known by its modern rendition or pronunciation, Kiev. So that is why this man is known as Vladimir to the Russians, which is a very common Russian first name, obviously Vladimir Lenin or Vladimir Putin now. But Vladimir, like Vladimir Zelensky, is an extremely common name for the Ukrainians. The pronunciations are similar, the history is similar, it's all extraordinarily similar stuff to one extent or the other. So this Prince Vladimir, basically would come to his, so he would be the guy who's mainly responsible for this piece, this locus of unification between the Russians and the Ukrainians that exists to this day. But his story is actually a relative newcomer. Rurik was a prince who established his rule over Novgorod, and he had two followers named Askeladd and Dior. Askeladd and Dior double-crossed him and conquered the city of Kiev without giving their allegiance to him. Eventually, after when Rurik died, his son Igor was way too young to inherit the throne, so he relied on a regent, a relative who was Rurik's best general, a man named Oleg. And Oleg not only raised the young child to be the ruler of the Varangians in Eastern Europe, of the Slavic peoples that they were conquering and intermarrying with at a rapid pace, creating a new people called the Rus, but these people were also, Oleg would get revenge for what Askeladd and Dior, who were supposed to be friends and benefactors or beneficiaries of Rurik, that he would go back and get revenge against them by conquering Kiev and making Kiev the central city of the Varangian settlements for these Viking raiders. And so Novgorod would be one of the cities, but Kiev would be the more important city and the largest city in that area for several centuries to come. Notice how I haven't mentioned the names Moscow or St. Petersburg yet, because really neither of them existed for the most part and are relative newcomers when you compare them to Kiev, Novgorod, or any of the other cities on that area. Now, obviously, many of these Vikings came from Nordic countries such as Sweden and Finland. One of the princesses that came from this area was a woman named Olga. And Olga was eventually married to Prince Igor, and they became the rulers of the Rus after Oleg died. So Prince Igor was a very successful ruler, loved to conquer, trade, and establish strong networks, and he was eventually hunted down and killed by a group of Slavic raiders called the Drevelians. I know that sounds like it's something from Star Trek, but they're actually a historical group of Slavs that lived in the Eastern European Russian area. This is all Western Russia. This is all what's called European Russia. It's all west of the Ural Mountains, which is considered the border between Western Russia or European Russia and Eastern Russia, which most of it is in Asia, such as Siberia and Kamchatka. But basically, Igor would be killed by these people in a horrific way, as he was literally pulled apart, was ripped apart, basically in a drawing and quartering sort of manner. And after that, he was after that, Olga, who was a very devout woman and one of the earliest Christian leaders of these people, who had to this point been pagans for the most part, worshiping basically the theology of the Norse gods with variegation to one point or another, and who had settled in this region as an extension of Vikings, and most Vikings at that time worshipped Odin and Thor and the gods of Northern Europe. So these people weren't very well acquainted with Christianity particularly, but they were acquainted with a growing popular form of Christianity known as Orthodox Christianity. Orthodox Christianity was obviously most famous for the church found in this city, Constantinople. This is the Hagia Sophia, or Holy Wisdom, and this had been the center of Orthodox Christianity for centuries to come. Already by the time the Rus show up. So for centuries, Orthodox Christianity had flourished in Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, which had controlled large sections of Anatolia. For a while, they had controlled the Middle East until it was conquered by the Muslims, and they had controlled most of southeastern Europe. Two brothers had brought a new language called the Cyrillic language to help translate the Bible for the native peoples of the Balkans in southeastern Europe and then to Eastern Europe. So the Slavic languages and the Cyrillic alphabet, which the Russian alphabet is included in that, is a derivative of that, were influenced and created, or at least codified by Christian missionaries who created a Bible that the natives could understand and use, and had slowly but surely began the precipitous process of converting them to Christianity, a Christianity that is focused more on mystical experiences and speaking Greek than Latin, which differentiated them from the Roman Catholics in Western Europe, like in France, Italy, and England. So the point is, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so the it wouldn't take long for this religion and this language and this new way of speaking and this new way of writing to make it all the way to Russia and to the Vikings who had settled along the coast, along the banks of the Volga or Don or Dnieper River, and who had the Varangians who had intermarried with the Slavs to create the Rus, the followers of Rurik, the Rurikid. So the Rurikid would slowly but surely become influenced by these Eastern Christian writings and these Eastern Christian missionaries and saints as they continued to spread their influence and the Christian gospel to Eastern Europe and the edges of the European continent, at least in the East. So Olga was herself a Christian convert who was very, very full of religious vigor and zeal, and had a sense of indignation when her husband was literally torn apart by wild horses by the Drevelians. So what she believed was holy justification given to her by God. She raised an army, slaughtered a huge number of them, then went back, amassed yet another army, and slaughtered all of the Drevelians, basically conquering and acquiring their lands into this growing principality known by this point as the Kievan Rus. And I will refer to them as the Kievan Rus from this point because their capital city was Kiev, and the people they were the descendants of Rurikid, the Rus. And that is where we will, of course, get the name Russia. So, the so Olga would become so popular amongst her people and so popular in spreading Christianity to the Rurikid that she would become a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church, regardless of all of the horrifying acts of brutality she had done against the Drevelians. And she would rule as an able and powerful administrator and regent over her young son Sviatoslav until he would take power for his own, and in 957. She did this in about 945, 946. After Igor was killed, she hunted down his Drevelian murderers and had them all executed. Then in 957, when Igor is basically, hold on a second. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, guys. Anyways, and I'm not reading off my computer. This is all coming from my memory. So thank you very much, man, with no name. I appreciate the fact that you think that I'm a human computer. But anyways, point being, and by the way, if you're enjoying this, consider liking and subscribing. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel where I bring you history in a friendly neighborhood manner, and I am doing my live stream lecture we do every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, this time about the rise of Christianity in Eastern Europe, particularly in Ukraine and Russia, and how that is an ancestral tie between these two warring states that continue to sit at the precipice of world and geopolitical affairs. So thank you and welcome, and I hope you are enjoying this. If you enjoy history, consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. And yes, man with no name, it makes me smart. Probably smarter than you are. But anyways, I don't mean to brag, just kind of obvious. I'm staring at the screen because I'm looking at the chat. So my point being, the fact of the matter, and if I had a computer, this is all done from my phone. If I had a computer, I'd be looking over here to read off of the computer. And I wouldn't be able to see the chat if I was reading it off of my screen on my phone. So, again, yes, let's get back to the history. Thank you, MMA. I'm pretty sure it's higher than that. So, anyways, what I was going to say is, Olga establishes herself as the leader of the Rus and brings the Christian faith to most of the people of Rurikid, although they aren't willing to accept it at first, and many of them hold on to the ancient paganic rituals of both the Slavic peoples and the Nordic peoples. So this is worship of Thor and Odin, but not exactly the same way. There's different legends and myths based on different cultural areas as such. That's why there's different legends with different gods in England than there are in Germany, despite the fact that the Anglo-Saxons conquered England and settled it in the 5th century. So anyways, what was I going to say? All right, so Olga holds on to power and basically rules as a regent until 957 when Sviatoslav decides to come to power. And while Sviatoslav will remain a pagan, he continues to value and cherish his mother's wisdom and her ability to govern. She has proven herself to be a capable, powerful, vindictive, and shrewd ruler, and she will continue to oversee all of the political and domestic affairs of the country for the next 12 years, while Sviatoslav basically builds the Kievan Rus into a small empire, conquering large segments of land in the east in what is now the Western Urals, which is actually part of Russia proper. So the Kievan Rus have expanded beyond just being a modern-day Ukrainian apparatus to being Ukrainian and Russian. So this is a Russo-Ukrainian place, and this is where the debate goes. Who founded whom? Did the Russians found the Ukrainians, or did the Ukrainians found the Russians? And although this debate seems like it wouldn't matter a thousand years later, the debate over who settled Israel or Gaza or Palestine first obviously is a huge, significantly geopolitically relevant issue. So is who settled this area first. And while the Ukrainians are the locus of our attention, with obviously Kiev being the major city, it is important to note that Rurikid began in Novgorod, and his followers went from Novgorod southward into Kiev, and Novgorod is part of Russia to this day. So take with that what you will. And obviously Russia has had the bulk of control over Ukraine over the last 1,000 years. That doesn't mean that they have the right to control it now. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just telling you the history, folks. So thank you. Anyways, and this is about, and by the way, MMA, I like the question. Thank you so much, Abdul. Please consider liking and subscribing. MMA is asking, when is this? This is about 957. Sviatoslav comes of age, his regency ends, and his mother he assigns to run the kingdom while he goes and conquers a bunch of people in the western area of the Ural Mountains. So eventually, Sviatoslav will assume full power in 969 when Olga dies, but she will be memorialized forever for having avenged her husband's death and ruled wisely and charitably as a good Christian princess. And Princess Olga will become an Eastern Orthodox saint, one of the most famous and recognizable faces in all of Ukrainian history. She is the patron saint of the Ukrainians to this day and has obviously been a huge source of inspiration for them as they fight yet another against unformidable odds as this young girl, who's probably about 20, much younger than her husband, rose to power and avenged his murderers while also ruling over a thriving young principality in Eastern Europe. And for that, she deserves a lot of great props. I did a series previously on the channel where I talked about powerful female rulers. I really should have done one on her. I didn't know as much about her then as I do now, and I'm certainly glad I learned about her in time for this short series, which the video about this will be coming out tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a long form one about 3 minutes long or so. Please check that out. And I do shorts on this channel every day. And if you haven't, liked and subscribe, especially if you enjoy history. So anyways, 9:57, not 9:55. Drax, thank you for joining us. Anyways, point being, what happens next? Sviatoslav comes to power, and he will rule for about 10 years or so, and he remains a pagan. He was an extremely powerful conqueror. In fact, if you want to compare these people to anyone, he's like a William the Conqueror of sorts. He has increased the power and land holdings of the Kievan Rus. And in 978, he dies, and he is succeeded by his son, Vladimir. That is the Vladimir I was talking about. Now, Vladimir, like his mother, is highly influenced by by Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire. And when it comes to Eastern Europe, the Balkans, which is southeastern Europe, and all of this area, the most powerful nearby superpower in the world is indeed the Byzantine Empire. In fact, other than the Umayyad, at this time it's the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East, the Byzantine Empire is the most powerful empire in that area of the world. You have to go to China to find another rival one. So, and they're in flux at this point too between dynasties, as the Tang dynasty hasn't fully come to power. Actually, the Tang dynasty comes to power right around then. I've also done a short series on Chinese imperial dynasties, if you want to check that out. And my live is a live stream lecture about the ties between Russia and Ukraine, and then after that is finished, I'll be doing a Q&A, Ask Me Anything about social studies and history in probably just a few minutes. So yes, it is indeed everything history deal. But the point is that Vladimir decides that he wants to unify his people culturally. And to do that, as his kingdom has greatly expanded thanks to the work of his father and his grandmother, he has to find a unifying force. And when cultures need a unifying force, the first thing they decide is their religion. And the Kievan Rus have not had a unifying force religiously. They are separated different Nordic tribes that have intermarried with Slavic peoples, all with their own customs, traditions, and religious practices. And there's obviously been the growing and budding influence of the Byzantines and Orthodox Christianity, which is pictured in my background here with the Hagia Sophia, the Holy Wisdom, which was later turned into a mosque in Istanbul, which was then known as Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, modern-day Turkey. So the influence of Byzantine Christianity is spreading, and Vladimir spends years and sends out emissaries and agents to meet with different religions, consulting their different beliefs, and eventually he sends his missionaries, his ambassadors, to Constantinople. When they enter the Hagia Sophia, they are so overwhelmed by the beauty and splendor that they decide that this must be the church that we have been looking for. So this is a Russian legend, but supposedly they go back reporting that this is the only thing that they could ever declare their allegiance to, and so Vladimir decides that he will accept Christian baptism. Now, this is common. I wish I had that background. It's of him being baptized. But this is common. This is Vladimir here. And so Vladimir will accept Christian baptism, as many European leaders have done before him. Not only will he accept baptism, but it is assumed that his subjects will also receive the Christian faith. By the way, at this time, the Byzantine Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and the Roman Catholic Church are still pretty much united as one spiritual entity. So the connectivity with the Byzantines is a connectivity with the Western European Church as well. They have different traditions and are clearly starting to schism away from each other, but they do have a religious tradition and history. They both claim to be the Christian Church, and they are both think they are that they are the true Christian church. So anyways, Point being, what else? Let me see, what else was I going to say? So anyways, Vladimir decides that he is going to be, Vladimir decides that not only is he going to be a Christian, but his people will be a Christian as well, will be Christians as well. And this is met with some resistance, as it was in Western Europe when Charlemagne was conquering. So much like Charlemagne started this renaissance of religious and cultural development in France called the Carolingian Renaissance, there is a Vladimirian Renaissance in Ukraine and Western Russia at this time. This is in the late 980s, by the way. In 986, Vladimir accepts the Christian faith. He is baptized. He begins building new settlements, and he begins forcing the princes that pay homage and tribute to him to accept Christianity. He makes war with the Croats to the west and basically forces them to embrace the Christian faith. And throughout the rest of his reign, will continue to basically impress upon his subjects and all of his regional allies the need to accept Eastern Orthodoxy and Christianity. He will establish forms of Christian charity, scripture reading, hospitals, things like this, basically to show the beneficence of the Christian faith, make it look good, and make people more willing to accept it willingly rather than under the sword. Thank you so much, Rockstar. And yes, Kevin is absolutely right. Like the live and subscribe for more. But anyway, so Vladimir will reign for 37 years. He's an extremely successful general. He's an extremely successful administrator, and he is extremely successful at getting his religious message across, and that will lead him to be known as Prince Vladimir the Great. So he's not a king, he's not a czar, he's not an emperor yet. Russia has not created an empire yet. There is no Russia. There is the Kievan Rus. And that is what we've come into at the beginning of the 11th century. Eventually, the Kievan Rus will be destroyed by the Mongols, called the Golden Horde, and will be basically their subjects for centuries until they are reunited under a man named Ivan the Great. And he will create and he will bring the Grand Princely of Muscovy into the foray, and that will eventually become Russia and the Russian Empire. But this is the historical foundations of both the Ukrainian culture and the Russian culture and their religious practices. So despite all of the differences, the shared heritage between these two people is absolutely fascinating and incontrovertible. And when you share an area of land for so much time, even more so, dare I say, to some extent, than the Jews and the Palestinians, to some extent, not exactly the same. The Jews have obviously suffered from a huge amount of diaspora where they were not living in that land, in which a lot of it of the time was occupied by Arabs and Palestinians. But the truth of the matter is that the Ukrainians and Russians have had an incontrovertible amount of history where they have been united. Ukraine has struggled to maintain its independence. It was conquered by the It broke off from the Russians at some point, from the Muscovites, as they were known at the time. Then it was conquered by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 17th century. And eventually in 1655, the Russians under Tsar Alexei I managed to reconquer it and incorporate it into their empire, until the Russian Revolution, when the Bolsheviks established an independent Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic or Socialist Republic that would be part of the Soviet Union. The Russians would control them that way until 1991, when they would gain their independence at the fall of the Soviet Union and end of the Cold War. And ever since then, their autonomy has been something that has been questionable. Their democratic interests have been something that is questionable. Like the Russians, they do not have a democratic tradition or a democratic history, and their autonomy has been basically a big question mark, with Russia still being obviously Russia, right next to it, the largest nation on earth with unlimited manpower and resources. So anyways, and no, it is not false. This is, this is a basic summary of the history of the biggest connection between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Basically their biggest connection being their religious commonalities and ergo their belief in Orthodox Christianity, which has been despite the fact that there are many great divisions, especially today, has been a huge sign of unification between them, as they have both basically practiced the same form of Christianity for over 1,000 years, thanks mainly to this man, Vladimir, and his very, very brave granny, Olga of Kiev. So if you guys enjoyed this, consider liking and subscribing and joining the channel. And you guys can go check out my videos on Russian history. I've got a series on Russian czars as well. And my next full-length video tomorrow will be about we'll be discussing this in a little more detail, in a little bit more of a formal presentation. And also I have a video dropping today to make up from Friday when I was sick, and that will be about the Armenian genocide, as we just passed the anniversary and remembrance of the Armenian genocide, April 24th. So anyways, that is basically all I have with the live stream lecture period. So for the next hour or so, I will be answering all of we will do a Q&A, catching up because I missed Friday due to some food poisoning. And I don't want to say I know everything about history, but I know a decent amount. And people come onto the channel, at least one person will ask a question about a topic that I don't know about, and I have to go back and research. Which Robin Hood, if you're watching this now or later, I did look up Louis Wetzel, killed a lot of Native Americans, just let's say that. But anyways, sorry, that sounds very weird and random for you guys, but somebody was asking about that. I didn't know who Louis Wetzel was. I went back and researched him, and now I was ready to address it. And if Robin Hood is here, I hope he enjoyed hearing about that. But anyways, point being, I will answer all of your questions related to history, social studies, geography, geopolitics, past and present, the humanities, as best as I possibly can. I try to know as much as I possibly can about history, so I don't know everything, but I know a lot, and hopefully I can entertain you guys. And if what was his name? And if the man with no name is here, I would just like to say German history during that time is fascinating. Germany's actions during that time are deplorable. And I'm just looking through the chat, catching up a little bit. Lance, or the person who's blaming Lance from the Netherlands, thank you for joining us so much. Such a fascinating people. I love the Dutch Republic. I need to do a live stream lecture on them very soon because they're just such a fascinating people. Have you ever been to Germany? No, I have not been to Germany, but I'm glad. I would love to go there. And I'm doing a lot better, thank you, in No Way affiliated. No Way is a longtime friendly neighborhood historian, and it's easy to become a friendly neighborhood historian. Just like and subscribe. Thank you, Rockstar. I am doing my best to talk slower. I know that I have a problem with that. And usually it's because I am trying to catch up with the chat that I talk this fast, but I am doing my absolute best to talk slower. And I promise I will do my absolute best, Rockstar, to talk slower during the Q&A portion and answer them. And if you watch my video, I talk slower during that. My long form videos are usually a lot slower than my shorts, where I'm trying to get in more information than possible. I just wanted to get through the presentation, I guess, because I've got a lot to catch up on. If that was the only topic, I would be a little bit more breezy, but I have that Q&A I have to make up for from Friday. So thank you, Donald. I really appreciate that. No, Rockstar, I appreciate the feedback. You're being honest, and that's very nice of you. Let me see. And let me see, Abdul Rahman, I really appreciate that. Just going through the chat. So if you have a question about history, social studies, the humanities, drop it in the chat, and I will be sure to answer it as soon as I possibly can. And Rockstar, I'm History Hefner. That's where I get that nickname from. But this is a smoking jacket, which was common from the 19th century. The British brought it back after their war with the Russians, the Ottoman Empire. Can you see the unrest that's currently building across Europe and the West? Yes, there's a lot of unrest, and there's a lot of lack of assurance. They're not getting the assurance from the U.S. that they typically get, and the tariffs and Donald Trump's refusal. And I was talking about this at the very beginning. I'm telling history because it's relevant today. Obviously, the history that is happening with Russia, the history around Russia and Ukraine and their shared commonalities has obviously not pierced the minds of Vladimir Zelensky or Vladimir Putin that well, nor does it seem to have pierced the mind of the American president, who does not seem to want to take that into account. I think that President Trump, at absolute best, wants the war to end and people to stop dying, but at what cost, and will appeasement actually work with Putin? We don't know yet. So you can ask any history you would like, Abdul. I'm happy to answer it. And may I ask you if you know a few things about King Baldwin and Saladin? Yes, I've done videos about the Crusades. I should do one about Baldwin. The famous King Baldwin IV, the famous leper king, lived to only be 23, but was the only general who ever bested the greatest Arab general of all time, probably, Salah al-Din, who rose from obscurity to become the founder of the Ayyubid dynasty out of Egypt. He eventually had to wait for leprosy to basically get the best of King Baldwin. And Ridley Scott made a movie about him, but Baldwin was so unwell that he supposedly wore a mask and armor to shield because he had the leprosy destroying his skin, which we call Hansen's disease now. But I think it might have been Hansen's disease. And basically, Saladin became so frightened that his forces actually retreated at one point. And every time they met Baldwin, Baldwin would defeat him despite having a lot fewer forces. This was in the 1170s and 80s. In about 1099, a group of crusaders, many of them from France, had conquered in the First Crusade the city of Jerusalem and most of what's called the Levant, which is Western Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine, and had basically claimed that as the Holy Land, as a Christian kingdom, and had been fighting off Muslim incursions for the last 90 years. I was referring to unvetted mass refugees. Now, that's definitely another issue that's affecting the whole world. I was talking about this in the Q&A yesterday. Basically, the truth of the matter is the United States has a long vetted history of immigrants in the world, of bringing in immigrants from all over the world, and they've gone through various cycles. It was originally the Northern Europeans, then the Southern Europeans, the Jews, Asians. Now it seems to be Hispanic people, and they've gone through very similar struggles and stereotypes and challenges and successes and setbacks. And so that isn't as much the case with Europe, and especially with places like Britain and Eastern Europe. And because of that, there's a lot of question marks that are making a lot of Europeans nervous about mass immigration and the fact that many of their leaders seem hell-bent on it when many of them are not as sure about it. Yeah. Thank you for liking S2K. Do you know some Chinese history? Yes, Drax. I love Chinese history. I find China to be fascinating. You might enjoy my my series. I haven't put it in a playlist yet, but I did a short series of each Chinese dynasty going back to the Xia, who many believe are not true, but the Chinese have told me are actually true. A true dynasty about 1,800 years before the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, so BC. And they are the most antiquated Chinese imperial dynasty. And then from there, I've gone all the way through the Qing. So it's really fascinating. And yes, please press the thumbs up too. Good evening, Joe. Great to see you. I watched Gladiator 2 last night, and they had boats in the Colosseum. Yes, I've heard that was true, but sharks, not so much. They did fill up their amphitheaters all the time with water. The Romans did, and have sea performances. And Rockstar, I hope I'm speaking slower. Fat Muppet, I think you might be projecting a little bit. Ali is asking, do you believe democracy in USA is failing? Not necessarily in the USA. I think the USA trying to make countries that have never had democracy before practice democracy has failed, like Afghanistan. So, Dill, the most powerful female leader you find interesting. Thank you for asking that. I have an entire series about powerful female rulers. I should have done one about Olga of Kiev, who I just talked about during the lecture. But the most powerful female leader that I find interesting would be, she'd be up there, Boudica would be, who was trying to avenge her husband against the Romans. Similar story there. I don't know if you would consider Pocahontas. I like Catherine de Medici and how she manipulated the French to basically kill as many Protestants as she possibly could. Fascinating. Callian, I do love and know a lot about Irish history. The first major British colony to go free. Yeah. So what do you think about giving homeless people caffeine pills and hammers and making them my own army? Let me know how you do with that. I think that's called a gang, but all right. Have you seen the HBO series Rome? I've seen bits and pieces of it. It's actually not incredibly inaccurate, as bad as HBO can be with these sorts of things where it's all just about how much nudity they can get and how much violence they can get on the screen. It wasn't too bad. Do you know anything about the old London Tower where prisoners were kept? Could men actually get a job as a torturer? Yes, they could. That was very common in the Middle Ages, and it's not old. And I mean, it's old in the sense it's been in there for a long time, but it's the same building, or at least, well, I know it's been renovated, but William the Conqueror built the Tower of London as a series of military buildings that he constructed during the 11th century after he conquered England to make the English loyal to him by basically putting fear into their heads, and to their hearts. But yes, it was very possible, Almon, to get a job as a torturer. And I promise everyone I will answer your questions as soon as I possibly can. I'm just going through the chat and trying not to talk too fast. Lawrence of Arabia is bringing up Jessica Alba. Thank you for making my day better by making me think of her. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. MBM. Which are the most looked for professionals right now? I mean, STEM fields are just blowing up right now. How much does 1 gallon of, yep, probably as much as it does to block you, Steve. That's how much it costs. Drew Peanuts. When similar governments to ours fall, will certain countries fail? With certain countries, why would we want those people from third world? Well, Drew, that's more of a political question. There is this is a common issue about immigrants that has been a push and pull factor in immigration for a long time. A lot of nativists have always felt that immigrants from other countries will steal their jobs, commit crimes, and violate their women. That has been a stereotype surrounding immigrants who have come to countries legally and illegally since mass immigration became a thing in America in the 19th century, and it has now impacted the minds of the Europeans. Now, I'm not saying that it's a fully wrong notion or that. The idea and the fear is cultures from other societies in the world are different and have different values and might be more less conducive to Western ideas. But that is a sense of nativism in that. So that's where the debate is. 6 counties still under English occupation, now being sold out to the EU. Massive protest yesterday against the government. Yes, that's in Belfast. That's Northern Ireland, I believe you're referring to. Alfeo is asking if you can bring back one conqueror back, who would it be and why? I don't want to bring back Genghis Khan because I feel like there would be too many baby Genghises, and also I feel that there would be too much conquest. I want Napoleon back because I want to talk to him because I have so many questions. Like, I actually think that the invasion of Russia was justified. I do historical hot takes, and that's one of my hottest takes. He had every reason to invade Russia, and it seemed like a great idea on paper. He just had no idea that the Russians would basically destroy everything they had and then wait him out. But yes, Alman, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us and liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. But Alfeo, I'm definitely waiting on Napoleon. Joe Mack, I always wanted to know how Muammar Gaddafi became powerful in Libya. Do you know anything about that, Professor? Well, thank you for calling me Professor. It's so great to see you, Joe. But basically, Gaddafi, most of North Africa had been controlled by the French. I think Libya was controlled by the Italians, and then the British took it after World War II, or what I call World War III. You call it World War II, I call it World War III. But basically, Muammar Gaddafi was the leader of the Libyans and the dictator for a long time. And when the Europeans abandoned and left the African colonies under a lot of pressure from the Americans to do this in the middle of the Cold War, there was a power vacuum that basically led a lot of people to think that they could gain as much power and control as possible. And strongmen did well in those circumstances, and Gaddafi was one such strongman. Let me see here. In no way affiliated. Torturer. The pay is terrible, but when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Which I don't believe that. I think you work all the time. It's just you enjoy your work. Can you tell us about the Council of Nicaea? I'm not sure if I spelled it correct, but they were an early church council. Yes, that actually has to do with what I was talking about with the Byzantines. So I will use the background there one more time. So this reason the city of where the Hagia Sophia, this building was called Constantinople was because it was Constantine, the Roman emperor's new capital that he built upon the city of Byzantium. In 325, the Christian church was having a debate amongst itself between a group called the Orthodox or Traditionalists and the Arians. The Arians believed that Jesus had not originally been God, but had been created and then became a God. The traditionalists believe that Jesus had always been God who became a human and died on the cross for their sins, which might sound familiar to you because that's the winning side and that's the central tenet of Christianity, basically. The way it worked is Constantine called a council of bishops to resolve the issue, and they basically decided to use a particular Greek term, homoousios, which means that Jesus was of one substance with God the Father, meaning that Jesus was always God, and there you go. And that's the theological side of it. But basically, the political implications were huge. Constantine had learned from the mistakes of his predecessors and was no longer torturing the largest growing sect in the empire, the Christians, but had legalized them and was now using their influence and power to legitimize his own reign. And they also used him to legitimize their spiritual authority, seeing his victory as God's blessing. And of course, what group what group wants to continue to be persecuted? They obviously like the break from persecution and their growing influence, where the emperor of Rome, who, given whoever that was 100 years ago, would probably be rounding them up and killing them, was actually sitting in their meeting, listening to their ideas and stamping his approval on their theology, meant a lot to the Christian bishops there. Interestingly enough, by the way, one of the men at Nicaea was a man named Saint Nicholas of Myra, who was known for his charity, for supposedly throwing goodies through people's windows into their stockings and making toys for children. And the Russians came up with a legend about him that became Kris Kringle, and Thomas Nast reinvented him in a red suit and a giant sack of toys, and that becomes Santa Claus. Check out my video on the history of Christmas for more on that, Abdul. But yes, and St. Nicholas supposedly got so mad at the Bishop Arius, who proposed that Jesus wasn't always God, that he went up and smacked him. So Santa decked out a guy at the Council of Nicaea. That's all church speculation and legend, but it's a funny story anyways. What protests are embarrassing, Juan? Ali's asking, what do you think about Kurdish history? Many historians are not agreed about Kurds are coming from Gutis, but they accept Kurds are very old. They are an extremely old group. I don't know exactly where they come from. I don't know a huge amount about them. There is this idea of Kurdistan, the land of Stan, by the way, always means Kurd. It's a land of. So Afghanistan is the land of the Afghans. Pakistan is the land of the Pakis, whatever that means, because for a long time that area was just part of Hindustan, which was the land of the Hindus, which is the Indian subcontinent. That's what the Europeans called it. That's what Columbus would have known it as. That's what the British called it until they conquered it. Dublin, the Republic of Ireland. What's going on in Dublin, Callan? I don't know much more about the Kurds beyond that, Ali. Obviously, their desire to have their own country has been one of the biggest geopolitical questions of the 20th and 21st century. Yes, and you must understand the history. It's Orwell's line. Those who control the future, those who control the past control the present, and those who control the present control the future. You have to be able to know your history. And I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm just saying the past is a very powerful tool. Hello, Fire. Thank you for joining us. Honestly, if my history teachers taught like you, I would have paid attention. Thank you for your knowledge. Alfeo, you are so nice. I really appreciate that. That's our pinned message. Harry, great to see you. I'm glad you dropped in. We missed you very earlier. You would have liked what I talked about with Russia and Ukraine and the history around that. But you can check out my video tomorrow at 8 for that. Yes, Istanbul, it wasn't renamed until the 1930s. The Republic of Turkey did that. How true is the story with Achilles and, sorry, I forgot his name, but the guy from Troy? Oh, Paris. So supposedly, there's a lot of embellishment. I have talked about the Trojans very recently on this channel, and I have a picture. Yeah, there's Troy getting destroyed. There's the Trojan horse. But basically, there's a Greek poet in the 10th century BC, around there, named Homer, who is supposedly blind, and he writes two very famous epic poems, perhaps the most famous epic, meaning really long poems of all time, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad tells the story of how Troy is destroyed. The Odyssey tells the journey of Odysseus, one of the Greek kings who returns home in his own 10-year voyage. The 10-year siege of Troy depicted in the Iliad is probably extremely highly embellished. It is full of mythical religious things, but for a long time it was considered complete basically fantasy, not science fiction, complete historical fiction, just made up nonsense, until actual ruins showed in the 19th century that there was a Troy that was destroyed by the Greeks in Anatolia, probably in the 12th century BC, and Homer was paying homage to that, obviously embellishing it full of religious imagery and ideas. Supposedly, according to Homer, Prince Paris, the second son of Priam, the king of the Trojans, had a dream, and in the dream, three goddesses appeared to him: Demeter, Athena, and Aphrodite. Demeter promised him the most fruitful woman, I think it's Demeter, and Athena promised him the wisest woman, being the goddess of wisdom. That makes sense. The woman who literally escaped Zeus's head by splitting it open, by giving him a giant headache. And then Aphrodite, the most beautiful goddess, promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. And Paris chose the most beautiful woman. The most beautiful woman was Helen. Helen was the wife of King Melianus of the Spartans. Paris and his brother Hector went to Sparta on a mission, stole her away from Melianus, who went to his brother, a man named Agamemnon, told him that Paris and Hector had stolen his wife, and then they rallied the Mycenaeans, the Spartans, the Ithacans, led by Odysseus, who I mentioned a minute ago, and a bunch of other Greeks to basically go and attack the Trojans. And for 10 years, they fought to retrieve Helen of Troy, and they could not penetrate the impregnable walls of the city. Eventually, they brought with them the greatest warrior of their time, the strongest man, Achilles. And according to Homer, Achilles was dipped in the river Styx, the river that led to the underworld, by, I believe it was his mother when he was a baby, but she kept his heel out of the river. So she dipped all of his body except his bottom of his foot in there. And so he was weak in that area. And so at the final battle, when the Trojans sneak in the Greeks sneak in a giant horse and ambush the Trojans, Achilles is killed by Paris, who shoots him, or not Paris, it's someone else. In the movie that they made with Brad Pitt, it was Paris, but I think it was someone else in the story. But he's shot through, it might have been Paris in the story, but he's shot through the Achilles heel. That's why it's called your Achilles to this day, because it was his only weak spot. And that was what weakened him and allowed him to be killed. And that's where the stories of Achilles. There was no Alexander. Ajax, there were many great famous heroes in that story. Priam is the old wise king. Achilles is the great warrior. It's an incredible story, and obviously after that, the Odyssey is also fascinating because it tells how Odysseus left there to go home and had all sorts of his own problems. So, anyways. So that's some mythology. Like I said, I talk about the humanities. I talk about anything that's relevant to history, social studies, and you need to know the Iliad if you want to know anything about ancient Greece. This has impacted Greek culture and identity ever since then for 3,000 years. And Western ideology. Everybody knows the story of Troy. Everybody knows what a Trojan horse is. So anyways, thank you. That's a very great question, Althea. Harry is asking, do you think that the Monroe Doctrine was good considering its massive loophole of allowing American colonialism? It didn't allow American colonialism, it prevented British colonialism and European colonialism. It was later justified by Theodore Roosevelt to allow American colonialism. Didn't Constantinople fall or collapse? It was conquered by the Ottomans, who, guess what? I have a picture of them too. Fascinating empire, extremely powerful. 1453, they destroyed Constantinople. Do you think USA will buy Greenland in the future? They're trying to, and everybody criticizes President Trump for wanting to do that, but I must say he's not the first president to try to do it. Harry Truman tried to do it after World War III, or what you call World War II. Israel was Arabic. There were many Arabs in Israel. I am Anatolian, and I'm proud of that. You should be. There's a fascinating and beautiful history there. Anatolia region it's one of the most oldest. Absolutely true. Do you think Tsar Alexander II was a good Tsar of Russia? Great question, Harry. I think he was not only good, he might be the sleeper for the best Russian Tsar ever. Obviously, Catherine the Great and Peter the Great will always be considered the greatest Russian Tsars, but he was really good. I did not know about those mass protests, so I'll have to look them up. I don't know about states breaking away from the Union. I don't see that on the radar. If anything, it's going to be more liberal states because of Trump's presidency, but good question. Alfeo is saying, if you had one day to go back in time to witness any part of history, where would you be and why? Oh, there's so many. Lincoln getting shot, I think, would be at the top. I'd want to compare it to how Trump got shot and the way the public reacted, because people wouldn't have found out about Lincoln being shot for days afterwards. Yes, Dakota, please rise up, like, and subscribe. Yes. It's not a yard, Lobola. It's 36 inches. It is my smoking jacket. It is a British antique dressing gown from the 19th century. Please rank these countries and how they did while they were the world superpower. UK, France, the US. I don't know when France was the world superpower. Maybe under Napoleon, and that's a very brief time. And I love the French. I love French history. I love French society. I love everything about the French, but they were almost never the world power. It's almost that line from what is it? Infinity War is is Roadhouse still the best movie? Roadhouse was never the best movie. I would say the U.S. did a little bit better than the U.K., Harry. You and I've had this talk before. MBM, unfortunately, movies and fantasy games destroy the real history by not being accurate. Some of them do, but I'm just glad they introduce people to the topic. People know something about Italy in the 15th century because of Assassin's Creed. And thanks, Pickles, but I am not a Scientologist. I'm not clear. I'm not clear on your meaning. Yes, Qatar, I'm so glad that you've joined us. Consider liking and subscribing. Yalda, my pleasure to do it for you. I did allow American colonialism, as it says South America is not to be colonized for colonization by any European powers. It never mentions anything about American colonialism. And if you look at the 19th century, colonization for the Americans was the last thing on their mind. Monroe had no notion of colonizing. It is the first time America does issue hegemonic influence over Central and South America, but none of that area was ever colonized by America except Puerto Rico. Basically Puerto Rico, and Cuba was taken for a very short time from another empire that they were just basically extinguishing. Thoughts on Albania? I love how you have the Albanian flag as your handle, D3. Albania, I believe, became fully independent in 1913. The Italians controlled it for a while. Fascinating place. I don't know a huge amount about it. I think it was was it part of the Cold War, the Soviet sphere of influence? Was it a satellite? I'm not sure. I don't know a huge amount about its history, but I know a little bit. I want to know more. So please, D3, share anything if I'm missing anything. Clorox, great to see you. Did the Pope do all those horrible things to the death? There have been many. It all depends on which Pope. I don't think Francis has done anything in particular. Hi, Dan. Thank you for joining us. I did a live stream lecture about Russia and Ukraine's shared religious history, but I'm also answering any questions you might have about history or social studies. The Mexican-American War wasn't colonialism. The Mexican-American War was a border dispute against Mexico that had happened because the Texas rebels had overthrown the Mexican government and established themselves. I don't know much about Pope John XII. I would have to learn more about him, but because of that war between the Texas and the Americans, that entire area was then up for debate. And the Americans wanted it, but they were already moving in and settling in it. It's a thin line. I can see why you would call it colonialism, but I wouldn't. What do I think about the 9/11 attack? Well, I mean, I hate to disappoint you if you're looking for a conspiracy theory. I typically think that the general narrative about it is generally true. I do admit that the United States had some advanced knowledge of it happening and probably could have done more to stop it, though. I just don't think they ever took it seriously. Which state or states you've visited and which you liked and why? I recently went to Arizona, and I liked it because it just felt less populated. But then again, I don't share where I'm from. I liked Arizona because there's a lot of space. There's a lot of desert. It's enjoyable. So they just happened to annex Texas and loads of other places that are now states after that war. They had instigated. They instigated it and they won it. They did not, those areas, there were already Americans living in all of those areas. Look at Kit Carson, John C. Fremont, look at those areas. That area was not what had just lost the Spanish had lost it to the Mexicans, who were trying to control it. And if you look at what the Mexicans were doing, they were far crueler than even the Spanish were. Oh yeah, I've heard, oh yeah, that guy. There are so many crazy popes, it's just crazy. I don't know if 9/11 helped them do that. More like helped them spend trillions of dollars on two wars that went nowhere. Believe me, I'm not waving the George W. Bush flag, and I don't think anyone necessarily is. So, anyways, we're just over an hour. If you guys would like to keep it going and ask a few more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But if not, we can call it if you'd like. We've been going for an hour. I'm doing a catch-up on my Q&A, Ask Me Anything, from Friday when I was sick. I usually do those at 6 Eastern on Fridays and Saturdays, and then Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern, it's just live stream lecture, but I've had to do both to catch up from Friday when I, like I said, was under the weather. So, what do you think about the civil wars in Africa? There's been a lot of them. Which one in particular do you want me to discuss? There was a huge power vacuum created in those areas because the Europeans left that area destabilized without the proper economic and societal tools. And there were a lot of kleptocrats who snuck in trying to seize as much power and control as they could. I don't know about the Battle of Kettle from 877. Maybe MMA, you can tell me a little bit about it. Do you think the British should have gave back Hong Kong to China? I think Hong Kong should have gotten autonomous power. That's what they were asking for, and then when COVID hit, all of their demonstrations were shut down. They were asking to be an autonomous country. I mean, Singapore is autonomous. Vatican City, Monaco, Hong Kong can be autonomous. There's nothing wrong with that. So, but anyways, let's see here. Corona was a weapon to stop Hong Kong. I don't know about that necessarily. Do you think Britain should have given independence to Malta, even though they wanted us to annex them? I don't know much about that. Again, I think that national determination is what matters. Everyone's asking, should the United States get Greenland or not? If the people of Greenland want that, then yes. If they don't, then no. If the Crimeans did indeed vote to join Russia, they should be allowed to join Russia. There is nothing wrong with that. If an area that is disputed and has a history of being disputed wants to join another part, it should be allowed through democratic processes as best as possible to join that area. And that should be the case. That should have been the case with Malta if that's the full story. So, yeah. Singapore, yeah. They're sovereign. That's what I mean. So because they're autonomous in the sense that they are they determine what they want. And I know that Greenland has some form of autonomy itself, but yes, they're a sovereign state with full autonomy, and I think that Hong Kong should have gotten that. I don't think the British should control Hong Kong. I mean, the Scottish have voted several times to leave Britain, and every time they choose to stay. There's an example of that. And yes, there need to be checks and balances on democracy. I'm not saying there didn't need to be. I've studied government and civics and things like that. What is Siama Tom? I don't know what that is. So anyways, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel where we bring you history in a friendly neighborhood manner. If you've enjoyed what we've talked about, consider liking and subscribing. I'm going to, let's see, I think Hong Kong should be given a referendum on whether they wanted to stay with Britain or go to China. That would have been fair. Thanks. How did Slavs end up in Balkans? Migration, they basically are there. There were many different Indo-Aryan groups that moved from the Asian steppe and from Turkey westward, and several of them settled along that area. There was ancient peoples like the Scythians, who supposedly were the primogenitors of the Slavs, but yes, I'm not sure about exact specifics. Do you think China will make a move on Taiwan? Not right now. I'm a civil servant. Your channel is great. I work for an intelligence bureau. Thank you, Dans. I appreciate that. And history and politics is something I can get behind. And Hong Kong was very autonomous under British control and had its own elected legislature. The only thing that was still appointed was the governor. Yeah, again, that's like the American colonies. That doesn't mean they didn't want their independence. The Illyrians. Well, those were in the Balkans. That's what the Romans controlled that. The Romans also conquered Dacia. That's why Romanian to this day is a language of Latin base, just like Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, and Italian. English is partly based on French and German, but still. And the governor, Chris Patten, was very liked by the people of Hong Kong. I did not know that, so thank you for sharing that with me and enlightening me a little bit more on that. Your expertise in British history never ceases to amaze me, Harry. I hope you've checked out my series on the British monarchs. But yeah. Bro, what do you think is the next oil? Is it semiconductor or quantum computing? I'm not sure if it's either of those. I think it might be quantum computing or AI, but at the same time, rare minerals is the big thing on the market. The fact that the Chinese have so much of that and are not going to be sharing that with the United States is absolutely huge. The development of those rare minerals here in the US is also huge. I've also been reading recently that there is evidence now that oil can be somewhat renewable. That will change the game of energy and renewable energy for a huge part. If more of the world's countries turn to nuclear power, that could be an example of something that shifts the balance. There was a man in a mental hospital who said Britain claims to be the oldest democracy in the world, and it wants to give Hong Kong to an authoritarian regime without the consent of people of Hong Kong, correct? Which is absolutely true. Okay? Yeah, rare earth minerals. So, anyways, we are coming up on about 70 minutes. I'm going to call it. We've had a good turnout, and it was a fun, interesting discussion about some Russian and Ukrainian history. Hopefully you guys gleaned something from that helps inform you about how to understand the situation that you see on the news every day, maybe some clarity there. Check out my full-length video on that tomorrow at 8 p.m. Check out my full-length video today, dropping in 3 hours from now, about the Armenian genocide, something that we should obviously take seriously and remember, as it was just memorialized on April 24th. So I hope everybody has a great week. I will see you again on Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me anything you would like. And Drax, come with questions about China, and I'll be happy to answer them and about their amazing history. A lifelong peer and would argue for people of Hong Kong for the rest of his life. Still does great person. I'll have to look into him. Thank you so much. Chris Patton. I appreciate that, Harry. All right. I hope you all take care. Have a great week. I'll see you Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel of History Hefner signing off. Remember, like and subscribe. And I will see you at the end of this week. Take care and love history.